There's something about the sound of the sea that feels like home. I live on the coast and I've worked in maritime industry for over 20 years. During that time, I've seen more and more women forging their careers in everything from ports to policy, from bridge to boardroom, from fishing vessels to super yachts. But let's be honest, do we hear about those stories of success? Do we know about the challenges they face and the adventures they've experienced? Well, that's where Women in Maritime comes in a series of open and thought-provoking conversations. I'll be bringing you these stories, and I hope you can join me.
Hello, welcome to Women in Maritime, and I'm joined by Antoinette Keller in South Africa today. Antoinette, thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to speak to you very much, Antoinette, again after meeting you, because I would describe you as a bit of a trailblazer for women working in maritime. You might not want to hear that description of yourself.
Thank you, Julia. I don't consider myself as a trailblazer, but I'm humbled if it happens to be like that. Mom and Dad comes from humble beginnings. We're 4 children. There was no money to go to university. So I never even thought of a career at sea. So the subjects got me there, and I had my interview in Braamfontein in Johannesburg, back then from the harbour authorities. They were looking at taking in cadets. And so I joined the National Port Authority. Back then they called them Portnet. And there was almost 700 odd candidates, and I was blessed to be one of the 15 that was chosen, you know.
Wow, so 700. That was popular.
Yeah. I never intended to see it as a male-dominant male industry. I was very naive that way, if that makes sense.
Yes, because it's not a very visible career when kids are growing up.
As you see vessels at sea and you see ships at sea, but you don't actually know that is the industry that drives the economy, you know. And I was very fortunate. Like I said, I was one of the 15 chosen. And then Portnet back then had a memorandum of understanding with SAF Marine. And SAF Marine was eventually bought over by Maersk. But it was a very South African company, and the main shareholders used to be Old Mutual. Maersk bought SAF Marine. So in a way, I was very fortunate because I had the opportunity to sail with fellow South Africans and, you know, fellow cadets. And it wasn't the same as what we have today, all these different nationalities and different cultures and things like that. We were very South African, if I can put it that way.
And what level were you then? Was that while you were at sort of your training level then, that you were getting experience at sea?
Yeah, our model works very similar to the UK. I don't want to be presumptuous, but we do have a similar setup back then where you did like 6 months at college, I would say, if you want to call it college. And then you were introduced into the practical side of things to go to sea. But before you go to sea, you had to do a pre-sea training course, and you did, you know, the open lifeboats with the oars. I mean, it's crazy. And still wire splicing and rope splicing and all that good old knots in ropes and things, that good old seamanship. And that was a 2-week-long course on the very first vessel that I was aware of that went to the Antarctic. Then I joined my first ship with SAF Marine as a cadet, a deck cadet. It's amazing how you remember these days and dates. It was the 1st of August 1992. Yeah, and I was 19 years old. I mean, really, it's crazy.
The start.
And yeah, it was wonderful. And then we went from Cape Town directly to Durban for dry dock. So I think that was an amazing start to my sea career, because you're in dry dock, you can see the whole ship, and I go, oh, okay. So this is what I'm actually getting myself into, because then I didn't know. I didn't know what an echo sounder was, or a transducer, or, what's a needle gun, paint. I mean, we can go on forever, but I think in a way, working with the deck crew gave me good training in ways of that good old seamanship, if that makes sense. I was very well looked after. The bosun took me under his wing, and don't think he let me off light either. Those earmuffs and the goggles and the muscles grew very quickly. So, physical work. And then so my first ship was 8 months and 29.
Were you serving as the only woman on those crews, or did you have other colleagues that were women seafarers as well?
It was very new to South Africa, so I was the first South African, but you won't believe this. I sailed with a lady called Samantha, and she was British, and she was the second officer on board. But it was a little bit odd when you walk into a classroom and it's mainly just, back then, boys. I don't know how to say it. I still remember thinking by myself, so where's all the other girls? I mean, I thought it's just going to, a unisex environment. I don't know how else to put that. And the first challenge was when someone asked me what I was doing. I said, well, I'm studying maritime studies. And two of the colleagues burst out laughing. They thought I was joking. So I definitely started my career navigating blind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you went in and you didn't really have any preconceptions. You just
Nothing
went in,
whatsoever.
Got there, found out as you went along.
Yeah. And the lectures as well, they were fantastic. I mean, they didn't make me feel out. I didn't get, like Captain Hoop's store was the head, and he was an ex-seafarer himself. And the lecturers all went to sea themselves. So they were very supportive. And I think, sorry, Julia, I think that is important to note that, because they were part of my success,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that you were treated very equitably when you were training.
Training, yes, definitely. And also in a way put on the spot at the same time. I had to do the first splice, or I had to be the first one to start the lifeboat engine, or so the pressure was there, but it made me tough, It's like when the guys say, well, where's Antoinette? Then I said, but come sweep with us. Come, let's sweep this hold, and, let's do this together. And there was no such word as can't, because I had fellow colleagues cadets that says, don't tell me you can't, you can. So I was very fortunate that way. But there was a situation where things were just physically too daunting, let's put it that way. So then you come up with alternative ways to do it. And so it taught me to think differently. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it failed, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it failed. And that's how you go.
Yes, yeah, learning through experience. And what about you are a Master Unlimited. You have that certification, so you're a captain. How did you progress to the top there and sort of work your way through that? Was that something you had as a goal, that you really wanted to get there?
Well, as I told you, I was actually taken on board by the port authorities. So the end goal was actually to become a pilot. But it ended up not becoming that. I mean, I looked at how the pilots climbed the pilot ladder and I thought, I don't know if that is actually for me. I enjoyed the calmness. My favorite times on board the ships were 4 to 8. The reason being, I love the sunrises. I love the sunsets. I love just the beauty of it all. How did I progress? I'm lucky in a way, in the sense of it wasn't all good, Julia. But I don't want to just face on the negative. There were comments like, what do you think you tried to prove? Why are you here? Come and here's my shirts, iron my shirts, clean my cabin. The girly jobs. And I'm sure you've heard this many times before. But then, like I said, I was lucky. I was on board with 6 other cadets with me. And they made me feel at home in a sense of, Antoinette, if we must do it, you must do it. If we can do it, you can do it. So when you ask how I went through the ranks, I was first in my class to get my Office of the Watch. Yay. And then Saf Marine was obviously bought over, and they had to look after their own cadets and their own seafarers. So we were left at home as Portnet employees. Then I thought, well, let me try different companies. And so I tried Unicorn, and I got a completely different experience at Unicorn. So that was also, I don't know if you're familiar with Unicorn, but it's like now it was Grinrod and all that, if that may ring a bell. But Unicorn just went over from complete ro-ros, general cargo to tankers. So they went into a tanker route. So Unicorn taught me a lot of older vessel, a lot of get more dirty type of vibe, very fun. They still had the derricks, they had cranes, they had still tween decks that you had to open with the cranes. So this experience.
So you did a lot of mechanical and engineering stuff as well on there. Because you just
I did 2 weeks worth of engine room time as well. There was no getting away. I even did cards. So that is when, so the engineers will know what that is. I was very proud of my first lots in taking cards and doing engine room time, doing rounds in the engine room, doing engine room projects, looking after like a project on purifiers, project on freshwater alternate generators, how the engine works. Look, I would never be an engineer, I must be honest. That's not my forte. But do I know what a boiler looks like? Yes, I do. Do I know what, the bits and pieces in the engine room is? Of course I do, because I had to. But like I said, that was Unicorn. They did an island run. I finished all my sea service with Unicorn. Then they arranged a vessel because they sold the last vessel I sailed on. And then I thought, no, man, now I'm short sea service again, and I don't like to be left behind. And so, you keep touch with your peers and things like that. So Unicorn was very kind. They arranged a trip for me on one of the Dalmas vessel, and I joined the Dalmas Tourville. And that's the first time, like with Unicorn, where I sailed with different cultures. Like in Saf Marine, the deck crew was our coloured community, if I can put it that way. Very South African, a lot of the officers South African, but we did have British officers on board in Saf Marine. In Unicorn, very South African. Then they had the Polish officers, and then they had the Zulu crew, which was a very different dynamic, very different culture to get used to. And Filipinos. That was my introduction to sailing with Filipinos, yes.
Yeah,
and then,
it's a very multicultural world, isn't it? Your first job was very much an Australian-centred company, but that's quite unusual now, isn't it? And actually most seafarers will be serving with a range of different nationality in a full crew, won't they?
Yeah, I think that is what helped me a lot as well, is to sail with your own. I know it sounds crazy to say that, but I'm proudly South African. And I'm blessed that I was still within that system that could sail with the majority South Africans. It went right up to, I even sailed with De Beers, the De Beers that's into diamonds and things like that. So I did some traversing and rock drilling and rock grabbing and, like seismic, looking where the diamonds are. And then actually also being on mining vessels, mining for those diamonds. So I I sailed with all 3 South African companies. And then things changed. Then first aboard Saf Marine, I was promoted to chief mate in 2000. I got my master's in 2001. And then I came ashore in 2005.
I'm interested to know what it was like getting to that level, your Master Unlimited, and whether you found it a challenge or whether you just enjoyed that process.
I passed my national higher diploma, or if you put it equivalent to like the nautical science degree with cum laude. So I never had a challenge with the theory. And once I got the hang of it practically, I really enjoyed it. Did I have challenges? Yes, I did.
I think it's interesting. I think I don't know if it was you told me or if I read it somewhere, but you and your husband both became qualified at the same time. Is that right? You beat him slightly.
I got it before him. I got it the same day, but I went in first, yes. Vernon joined. We were cadets together, and then we became friends, and then we became besties, and we really just literally wrote letters to each other, and we speak the same language. We both Afrikaans, and we have both that ingrained culture within us. So we had some sort of kinship, but he was always he allowed me to do what I needed to do, Julia. I don't know how better to describe. He was the soul that gave me the strength without me knowing it. I just think it's a beautiful friendship that turned into a beautiful marriage.
Working as a seafarer means that you might have to be away from your family and your partner for quite a while. So that can be a downside of seafaring, can't it?
We had the opportunity to sail together when we were different ranks. Sometimes I was at a higher rank than he was, and vice versa.
You were quite lucky, really, to serve together on a lot of your
it
roles.
was not all the time, but we did have some time together, and that is because the company had a very open mind as well. I mean, SAF Marine allowed it, and we're grateful for that. So they planned our leaves together, they planned our tours together, but there did come a stage where Vernon was asked to come ashore and help out in the technical environment. So there was a lot of engagement with Belgium and things like that. And then I went to sea. And then in 2005, as it goes, we got married in 97, 2005, we said, okay, maybe it's time to think of maybe starting a family. It didn't turn out so well. So then I joined SAF Marine ashore, and I became a nautical superintendent ashore. Then the technical organization moved to Singapore, and Vernon was at sea. And it's humbling because you gave the advice to the masters, and you were in charge of the safety management system, and you were in charge of the LTIs and the near misses and the reports that's been sent through and the update of the safety management system. And I know this podcast is about me, but I'm very proud of my husband because he wrote the training manual for SAF Marine that was required for the safety management system. So to grow from, the hood radars with the little chronographs to do, collision avoidance, to be the first sort of generation to see the GPS being fitted on board. I mean, there was no GPS when I joined. It was only fitted 2 years later. We did Omega, Lorraine C, Deca, direction finding. Sextant wasn't an unusual thing. It was the norm. It's nice to say that, hey, I can navigate by using a sextant. That's awesome. So getting the masters at the same time, it was just a next step, Julia. I don't know. I didn't see it as, oh, wow, it's the first South African female master in Africa, whatever it is. Someone had to be first.
You clearly didn't struggle with the study and the academic side of things, but then you've got some management sort of roles, I suppose, as you go up to be master level. So is that something that you've enjoyed?
I love the cargo work side of things. I love doing that cargo management, crawling around in ballast tanks, doing the inspection and ballast tanks. I know. They asked, where's the mates? And I was always wet trying to do a stroke coupling and fix it and things like that. That's the management level. I did have masters that had allowed me to bring vessels into port, through, leave you in charge through Malacca Straits, Dover, all those heavy traffic density areas, that I know the Thames like the back of my hand. There's a lot of trips up and down the Thames, the wonderful passage plan there, which the masters will say, that's not even necessary. But did I I had a lot of support from the masters as well. And I remember, still funny enough, walking on the quay to take the draft with the chief engineer. And he says, Antoinette, they want to recommend you to take command. And Julia, to be honest with you, being the first female to get her Master Mariner's Certificate of Competency, the spotlight was always there. And
yes, pressure.
As I shared with you, we wanted to start our family and didn't want it to become like one trip master and now I go home. If I committed to take command, I wanted to commit for another 5 years. And I couldn't give the company that, if that makes sense. And it was time for other girlies to start taking over. So I remember with Louise Angel, she was the first female to take command. And I remember her phoning me and says, but Antoinette, it was supposed to be you. I said, no, it was supposed to be you. Because we all have our role to play. I didn't want to take command, Julia. I did not want to. And I'm not going to be hypocritical and say I should have or I did not. No, I did not want it.
But is this part of the difficulty, that some women face in their careers is, you're at sea for a long time and it doesn't work when you want to start a family, does it?
Yeah, but it depends on how you see it as, does it work or does it not? At sea, it's hard. It's hard. But if there is one thing that I am very humbled by, is a lot of our African females go to sea. And their children are left by their grandmothers and the family to look after. And it's humbling because I couldn't see myself doing that. So if you can, see the offspring, I call my son my favorite offspring. If you can see them regularly, then yeah. But the days of taking your family also with you to sea is also, I grew up almost within that sea life where I still saw the captain bringing his wife and his children to sea, or the mate and the children, or that it was like a luxury if you were in the management levels to bring your family to sea. But how is that fair on those that couldn't, if that makes sense? But
it's not allowed now, is it? I don't know I didn't think it was something that happened anymore.
I can't say yes or no. I can't tell you yes or no. But when I was at sea, you were allowed to take your husband or wife with you and your little one. Your little one just had to be over 2 years old.
Yeah, I think it's not that much part of normal shipping contracts and life now, particularly. I do know people that did used to do that, but that doesn't seem to be part of the modern world of work at sea anymore. Yeah, I mean, the majority of seafarers, I think something like 80% are on contracts, aren't they? Sort of for 8 to 9 months. So it's quite a nice thing if you are on a permanent contract, I imagine. But majority of seafarers generally aren't, I believe, for most of their working life.
Now, when I traded in my sea legs, Vernon did back-to-back. That's when I started introducing that back-to-back system. And then it slowly started becoming contract work. Because I suppose it was very expensive. Because like I said, I had the first 6 months I went to sea, I got practical training. If you want to go to sea now in South Africa, you have to have all your theoretical training right up to your master's level before you can even set a foot on board a vessel.
Yes. So it's more, would you say it's more challenging now then, actually, to become a qualified seafarer and go through?
Juliet, this is an interesting topic that you're bringing up, because I like our system where you do a bit, you go to sea, and you figure out, is this what I want to do with my life or not? Because is it really fair to go through a whole degree program just to know that I actually don't want to be at sea? So
It's quite a commitment.
It is quite a commitment. So we have in South Africa 2 universities, one in Durban, and also, three, and also one in Port Elizabeth. But the seafarers are mainly coming from the one in Durban and the one in Cape Town. And then we have training institutions that says, but what if the guys just want to go to sea? They don't want to have a degree. You see, degrees open doors, whereas certificate of competency does not, unless you stay in that field.
Ah, okay.
So it's got its pros and its cons. So I don't know. So say, for example, like
So if we're
you're colorblind, you can't go to sea. And now you've spent 2 years at university.
Yeah,
So-
it's quite a commitment, isn't it, to a lifestyle?
Yes, I think personally it's very lonely. And that is where my passion now comes in, is the welfare and the mental wellness for seafarers. That's where my passion
Yeah, no,
now lies.
that's something I'd like to explore with you, Antoinette. So being at sea can be lonely, can't it? And, you know, what do you see as some of those challenges in that area of wellness and welfare for crew and officers and anyone who's working at sea?
Yeah, well, I think the MLC and both the C188 conventions has really put their foot down in what is required for accommodation, for example. When I was with De Beers, I had to share a bathroom with a male counterpart. And I know it sounds like, what? But it happened. And we had our knocking system. So there was a lot of, so he locks. But the fact remains is it was a risk. And now I'm talking now serious quickly. There is not enough understanding about the risk when there's not security in place. And I'm talking now emotional, physical security measures in place. It is very hard, depending on the background and your culture, to say no, especially if you're dealing with a more superior ranked officer or even rating. That can be problematic. Even though I was very well supported, Julia, there were circumstances that wasn't appropriate. And did I make my mistakes? Of course I did. How did I try to fit in? By being one of the boys. And that is what I want to say. You don't need to be one of the boys. You can be who you are. That's the message that I would like to say in this. You don't need to be one of the boys. Why do you want to change who you are? I'm naturally introverted, believe it or not. I'm naturally introverted. I had to learn to communicate. I had to learn to deal with this inner anxiety, which I was constantly carrying. I just didn't know what it was. Now I know what it is. But it took me 52, Julia. It took me 52 years to understand I'm on the spectrum. Now imagine going through life not understanding why you think differently to other people. Then you're at sea. And there's a hierarchy, right? And it's got order. And I think that's why it was good to me, because my brain needs order. And now you chuck me into a shore-based environment, and my brain goes, what's happening? It's all these different dynamics and all these different ideas. So my brain liked the structure. But not all brains like structure. Now you put the gender into the mix. I sailed with seafarers that were brilliant, and they were on, I call it the rainbow community, if that makes sense. They were part of the rainbow community. And there was nothing wrong, but I could see how they were criticized and made fun of behind their backs. I felt very safe.
There was discrimination, yes, that you saw, yeah.
Yeah. And I know this sounds horrible to say, but I almost felt safe with them because I know I'm not their type. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because violence and sexual harassment against women at sea is very common. Like, I've seen the research, and it's
not just
it's
against
common.
women. It's not just against the women. It's against who you choose to be. Now, I'm not going to hide the fact that I've got a transgender son. Will I send him to sea today? No, I will not.
Because it's too, you feel it's too risky an environment where...
It's too risky. Yes, it's too risky. Because it's hard as it is to tell yourself, to say, Mom, I didn't choose to be transgender, but that is who I am. It's like those seafarers I sailed with, they didn't choose to be gay, but that's who they are. I didn't choose to be...
Do you think it's changed?
No, go on.
No, I was just going to say, do you feel like the attitudes are changing slowly at sea, or that it's just going to take a lot longer?
I think it's always been there. I think we just were the generation that kept it under wraps. And now we have generations coming through that says, this is not okay. So has it improved? No. There's a lot more to be done. And I think ILO is doing a lot to fix it. But in the practicality way of things, in practice, is it working? That should be the question. Because yeah.
It's very interesting that you talk about the generations, because younger generations coming through have got some really different attitudes to gender, to sexuality, also to how they want to work. You know, they may not want to be at sea for eight months at a time, but also there's going to be a mismatch for a while, because the senior crew and officers would tend to be at the older age range. So that's going to take a while to level up, isn't it?
Yeah, and Julian, I think that's why we should have the hard conversations now. Because our seafarer community, and I'm saying seafarer community, is at a critical point. It's like, it's a skill desperately needed, but at the moment no one wants it. And nothing will change unless the work environment is safe. And it's not just at sea, it is ashore as well. Because the workspace is still, it's like I say, we're in different generations where I was taught whatever happens and you shut it and you move on. Where the generation that's coming through now says, hold on, this is not okay. What you're doing is not okay. And I will not shut it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And
yes, different attitudes and expectations.
Yeah, I'm proud of this new generation, but I can see the conflict. Because you've got this whole structured old generation, and I'm part of that old generation, I think. And then you have this new generation, and they go, you don't tell me what to do. You ask me if it's okay for me to do that. And unless we change and shift our thinking, we're going to mess up our maritime community terribly, and our industry and our economy. And it's got this whole big rolling snowball effect. Because I think, Julia, and this is just my opinion, that there's three things that we must be very well prepared for. And if we're not prepared and we don't have those discussions now, it's almost too late to have them even now already, is mental wellness and acceptance and complete inclusivity. That's what I mean with that. The second one is obviously global warming, the global climate. So that needs a new sort of different way to look at it. And the third thing is innovation and technology. I mean, look at AI. It is running before we can even put our earphones on. I mean, it is just way ahead of us. So if we don't innovate now and we don't train the new seafarer to adapt and be ready for that AI technology, that cybersecurity, all that, plus, like you say, the loneliness or whatever, I don't think we're going to see a seafarer in the future that's going to be lonely, because we're not going to have seafarers. We're going to have, how do I put them? Operators. We're going to have ship operators and technicians and things like that. The ships are going to drive themselves. We need to train our seafarers how to drive them. Look, it's way in the future, but we got to prepare for it now. Because we still need to move the products from A to B.
Yes.
And
also, like you said, it's a crisis that is coming, that a lot of people in the industry have been talking about, is that there will be a recruitment crisis to come.
And I am very proudly sitting at the southern tip of Africa and say, bring it on, peeps. Usher in the African era. We got one of the youngest employable youth.
Yes, you have a young population, relatively speaking, don't you, in South Africa?
Yes. And we need to tap into that potential. And if it means thinking differently, and think we can't get them trained up or using alternative methods, then we're bluffing ourselves. My method, my schooling doesn't count anymore. I think we passed that.
There's a lot of change in maritime at the moment. So there's decarbonisation, and that's perhaps some technical changes, training changes, which has to be done for the climate of the world, or we're all in a lot of trouble. And then AI and different technologies are even now being used on board ships to help with some of the work and deal with some of the data. And so there is going to be a lot of challenges for the new seafarers as well. Things are going to keep evolving. And I do think also at the moment, if there's 48%, they're missing out on a big, what is it at the moment, like 2% of women working at sea, which is the same as it was, Antoinette, when you qualified. That's the same percentage of women working at sea. So obviously there's a big section of the population that, if they're not encouraged enough to join and have a maritime career, then it's missing out on quite a big part of the population, or the female population worldwide.
Julia, that is it. Because why did I come ashore? I came ashore so that we could start a family. I'm the one, let's call it plainly, I'm the one with the eggs. You understand what I'm saying? You need that. And when you're at the top of your game, you're running out of your biological clock.
It's challenging.
It is challenging. So then I'll say, well, if it is not female seafarers, and there's definitely a lot more that can be done for let's talk now females to go to sea. But then they need to be protected. They need to be safe. And even furthermore, do you know how marginalized our rainbow community is? That they're also too scared to give it a go. That's another sector that can be tapped in. So I say, why should it be about male, female? It should be about humanity and giving humanity an equal and fair chance to be the best they can be and to be their authentic self. It took me a long time to be able to have this type of conversation, a very long time.
But inclusive teams are going to be stronger teams anyway, aren't they?
Inclusive teams, oh, for sure. But that is why we need more. That's why we need more psychologists. That's why we need more mental wellness, more coaches, more mentors. So is there anything to bring the humanity back?
Antoinette, is there anything that you know of that's perhaps happening in South Africa that's helping maybe younger people, or just people who are already along their careers in maritime with any of this mental wellness or support?
Well, what I can tell you is that South Africa is one of the countries with a lot of female seafarers. I don't know if you know that, but we actually got a lot of
No, I
female
don't know what the percentages are.
I can't tell you what the percentage is, but it's definitely not 2%. It's higher than most other countries. But please don't ask me what the percentage is. So that is our heritage, something we can be proud of. What have we done differently? It starts at a very young age. We've got maritime schools now. So you actually go as a youngster and you can start doing maritime economics and navigation and things whilst you're still at school. So we have Law Hill. We have a school in KwaZulu-Natal. And so we need to teach, how do they say? Give someone a fish and they eat for one day. Teach them how to fish and they will eat every day. So we got to teach from a very young age that love for the sea and the potential that the oceans can bring to the economy. And it's not just going to sea, but the whole maritime industry needs that. I mean, why should the surveyors, like we are surveyors now, but how did we go? We became seafarers, and then we got our masters or our chief engineers, and now only you can become a lecturer or you can become a surveyor or join a recognized organization. You almost need a parallel process that if you don't want to go to sea, what will make this process good enough to breach the gap, if that makes sense?
Yes. Yeah, so that because there will be some women who just a life at sea for long periods of time is just physically not going to work for them at various times in your life.
Yeah, well, that is the reality. That's what happened to me. It's like someone a long time ago said to me that steel breaks bones. Does that make sense? Steel breaks bones. And so my steel breaks bones. So my body has suffered without me knowing. And it is because I was silly enough to jog on a steel deck, for example, because I wanted to be fit. So I jogged on a steel deck. We worked with steel. Our knees, everything. The whole body felt it physically. And now I'm sitting with, I call it not a disability, but yeah, it took its toll, let's put it that way. And I want to warn people about that because maybe, and don't laugh at me now, but maybe we need more shock absorbent protective gear, for example, so that bone doesn't challenge the steel, so that the steel eventually win. Does that make sense? So
interesting. I mean, I knew about the physical exertion sometimes that you need to do your job at sea, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that you're just literally walking on solid giving steel surfaces the whole time and what that might do.
Exactly, and it did a lot of damage to my body. Other people may be more resilient, but it was something that I once again only recently picked up, and it took a bit of unkindness for it to come forward. But at the end of the day, once that whole body scan was done, I was shocked at what the results were. All my joints, everything, all of it are impacted. And I don't mind sharing that because if that can help someone else looking after themselves better, then that's important that they know that.
Yeah. So, Antoinette, what do you hope for women in working in maritime or wanting to work in maritime in the future? Have you got any hopes for the future of the industry?
I have hope, Julia, because what is humanity without hope? So for me, I would say look after mind, body, and spirit. They're not separate, they're one. And also, don't be judgmental. Inclusivity is for everyone. Bring the humanity back. Why are people so lonely? It's not just in the maritime sector. People are very lonely. Look at the elderly. They are passing on because they're lonely, not because they're unwell. And that statistics has proven that as well. So for our seafaring maritime community, The human element and the change in STCW now brings in that into personal survival and social responsibilities, that human element in. But Julia, it's not going to take a course. It really needs training. Really needs training. It is not just a 2-day course. You must understand what mental wellness means, what self-aware, what it means to be self-aware, if that makes sense. That is what's going to drive our maritime sector to remain sustainable. Because factors we are fighting against are that climate change factors, the humanity change factors, the geopolitical change factors. I mean, we all know the pestles. We can sit here and debate that for another 5 hours. But for me, maybe it sounds too simplistic, but bring the humanity back and see, don't judge the book by its cover.
I wish that maybe the business of maritime would get behind that a little bit more.
It shouldn't be a wish. It should be an obligation. It should be, call it a regulation even. I mean, it shouldn't be a nice to have.
No. But it's so often, not with all companies, but you do see some evidence, a lot of evidence that makes you just feel that seafarers are treated as commodities rather than humans.
Yes, it's part of the cargo.
And just looking for profit, where could some companies surely could just pay a little bit more to have their seafarers, or to have a few more seafarers, so that all seafarers could have proper work and rest while they're working. Or, sometimes the adjustments are not enormous, are they, to make life better at work?
Definitely. One of my favorite quotes is from Richard Branson, and he says, look after your employees and your employees will look after your company. And I don't know why people don't get that.
Yes. Well,
if you have to do a survey, I can almost guarantee that money will not be number one. Seafarers do get rated well, depending on the company, but so does seafarers get abandoned, as if, like you say, they're just a commodity that you can abandon. How many of our seafarers are not human trafficked? I mean, to me, that is surreal. In 2025, that is surreal. I still can't get my mind wrap around that.
I do agree with you. Your wish for more humanity in maritime would be great for everyone, for women wanting to work in maritime, for anyone, regardless of what gender or sexuality you identify as. And also, while we're on the subject of, diversity, is, in the average population, there's probably something like up to 20% of people could identify with being neurodiverse. Again, you talked about inclusivity. That's a part of it as well, isn't it? We don't want a team made up of all exactly the same people. Strong teams come from having a good mixture.
Exactly. And like I said, I thought I was neurotypical. I never thought I was neurodiverse. I didn't know. And then I couldn't even cope with the fact when I heard my child is on the spectrum, ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. But he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. And imagine, I'm very thankful for we're not 100 years ago, because 100 years ago, that poor child wouldn't have had a chance. So did we move forward? I think we did a bit. But I think COVID has taught us to just stop and pause and reflect. If COVID has taught us one thing, it's that. We need to have that real pause to make it work for the industry. We're in a crisis, Julia. No one can deny that. It is a fight between survival. Do we look after the earth or do we look after the people? But why should we choose either or? Why can't we do both?
Yeah, that is a good question about sustainability. So it doesn't need to be one or the other. It should be both. Well, I've really enjoyed talking with you, Antoinette, and about your journey in maritime, and you're a very empathetic person. And I think your thoughts about how we could be a bit more, people could have a bit more humanity in maritime is a really important theme. I don't think we've got all the answers, but like you said, there's hope.
Did you know that the only thing that drives whistleblowers are hope, hey? And that is just it. That's because they want the truth. And the truth is this, is that if we're not willing to treat each other with humanity, then there is no hope.
Yeah, that's very wise words. Thank you, Antoinette. Thank you so much for talking to me on Women in Maritime.
If your brand belongs in the heart of the yachting world, this is where it happens. Yachting International Radio reaches over 1 million yachting professionals and enthusiasts every month, with 77 million impressions, 220,000 social followers, and 74,000 podcast subscribers. Our hosts are insiders, crew, captains, CEOs, trusted voices shaping the industry. This is targeted, high-impact advertising in a luxury niche. Visit yachtinginternationalradio.com/advertise. Your audience is already listening.